How do you raise money for a movie?
That's a good question. Every project has been different. How I've put it together and figured it out. It's been various ways. Sometimes it's been grant money from, for example, SF Film does grants and they give a lot of money away to projects that warrant the money. Um, so I go to SF Film or Tribeca Film Institute. Well, TFI is not here anymore, but in the past I have, as well as Sundance has various labs, and there's other festivals as well that have some type of lab or dynamic to be able to do that. But outside of that, I go to places where I can find money. One of the ways I raised money on a project was that, at least in Long Island, there's country clubs everywhere. And in the summer, there are golf tournaments, and in New Jersey too, in upstate, Westchester. So I go to events where there's people that have that type of money. So I've gone to a golf tournament. I was at the table getting like my salsa water with lemon and lime as usual. And this guy came up to me and he's like, "Oh, what do you do? What's your story?" And he's a very interesting guy, not in film. He's kind of like a startup guy, and he's been in some really great ventures and made good money. And I told him like what I do and why I was there. And he's like, "Well, I know someone that you should talk to." And that was it. So I followed up with him, put me in touch with this guy. And I set up a meeting with this guy. And I still to this day don't know if he's a CPA or if he's a tax attorney. I still don't know. And I pretty much went in and I met with him and I told him what I do. And I'm like, I'm assuming that he has clientele or clients that have access to money that can invest. Because that was always the thing I did. I look for CPAs or lawyers that have a lot of clientele on that level that have that kind of income because they maybe need to lose money or they need to have write-offs or maybe they'll be open to that venture. So he looked at me and said, "I don't have anyone like that, And I'm like, "Why are we even here? How did this meeting even get set up?" He didn't even know what the meeting was about. I didn't even know who he was. And he's like, "Well, I invested in some plays and, I've done a movie or two." And I'm like, "Oh, you're the guy." And he's like, "Yeah." So I'm like, "I should be pitching you then." So I pitched him and, he's like, "All right, send me all the paperwork and everything. I'll look at it." So I followed up with him. And then like a month later, met up with him again. This time I came with my team. At the time I had representation. I came with my manager and, let him know that we're like legit. We're not going to take the money and run to Aruba. And he was like, "Okay, all right. Send me more paperwork and let me think about it." Sent the paperwork again, followed up with him a month later, like he said. He didn't read it. He hasn't looked at it. He hasn't had the time. He's very busy. I get it. Especially dealing with people's taxes or if he's a tax attorney, whatever. And then ultimately I went in that third time, just one-on-one with him and pitched him. And he cut me the check, just like that. So, does it always happen like that? No, and even till this day, he calls and checks in on me like, "Hey, he wants to, I was a member at the Friars Club, so I'd bring him there." The Friars Club is a prestigious private club in New York where Frank Sinatra, the Rat Pack, they were all members. They're the ones that started the Comedy Roast. So I was a member there for many years. And while being there, I would bring and entertain potential financiers. And the owner of the Minnesota Vikings is a member, I remember going in one night and I'm a curious person. I ask questions. And I saw that one of the rooms that's never really like booked up for private events was closed. And it was our Thursday night cabaret night. And I asked like one of the waiters that worked there, like, "What's going on? Why is the room closed?" "Oh, this guy's celebrating, he sold his company." I'm like, "Oh, that's cool. How much did he sell his company for?" "He sold it for 980 million. I'm like, "Whoa, who is this guy? I need to meet him." And everything is private, in a private club. So people don't really want their business being known. So I said, "Listen, give me the intel. I won't say your name. I'll just, say I found out." So I waited for this thing to end. And then I approached this guy, and I said, congratulations. And he doesn't know who the hell I am. Congratulating him. He's probably like, I'm like, yeah, man, you know, they call him the Wolf, you know, like he was slick, this guy, you know. He's like, guy became a billionaire, you know, selling his company. And he was well off before he sold the company. So, you know, I'm congratulating him and telling him how proud I am of him and it's amazing. And, you know, I know he probably had this whole story in his head, like, what the hell is this guy talking about? Who is he? You know, and then we just stayed in touch, you know, and I'd see him at various events, once in a blue. And he always just told me, like, you know, like when the time is right, if there was something that made sense, to approach him. You know, I never did approach him. There wasn't something I felt, because I feel that you have one shot sometimes, especially with a billionaire. So I want to make sure it's something that's a no-brainer. It lines up. I mean, this guy is screaming A-list, you know, so the project is not going to be something with an ensemble cast of working actors in television. This is probably going to be with Brad Pitt, you know, like then he's going to pay attention. He's that kind of guy, you know. So being in a private club has helped a lot, you know, like the Friars Club. I'd met so many, you know, financiers or potential financiers, and people introduced me, you know, or it doesn't even have to be the Friars Club. It could be Soho House or, you know, or Norwood, which is another private club on 14th Street in Manhattan, or the Core Club, which is super expensive. I think it's like 50 grand to apply for the application, and then 15,000 every year. So, you know, with the Friars Club, it was expensive, not as expensive as the Core Club. But that was one way I found a lot of, you know, potential financiers and people that are willing dealing, that like entertainment, because it's an entertainment club. And then going to polo matches, you know, to have a horse it's not like in the back in the day where everyone had a horse, you know, and it was cheap and having a car was expensive. It's the other way around now. If you have a horse, have a good horse, a horse that does polo, it's at least like $1 million or something, to feed it right, to maintain it, you know, have a ranch, it can run around. So I go to Bethpage Polo, it's in Long Island, and they also do it in the Hamptons in Long Island too. And I go to these matches, and I'll just go. And I look at the calendar. Sometimes they have an event with Ferrari. All right, if they can afford a Ferrari, they have a horse, they can definitely cut a check. So I go in and, you know, I just start talking to these people. I introduce them. And the thing is that most of these people, they started from something, or maybe they were born into a family with money, you know, but they respect the hustle. So, you know, straight to the point, make sure my I's are dotted, T's are crossed, who I am, why I'm there. And like, oh, you know, that's so interesting. And, you know, can add it to my collection or something. So did I successfully close any investors at polo matches? No, but I did build a Rolodex of people, you know, that were open and interested. And the things that you need one yes. You don't need, you know, a bunch of yeses. That's all you need. So, and then one door may open up to another door, you know. I made a promise to myself to go to Art Basel every year. A casting director I work with was in with these guys from RBC, the Royal Bank of Canada. I went to some really boring event that they threw together at the Harvard Club in Manhattan, and it was very stuffy, you know, Wall Street types, and, you know, I actually fell asleep a couple of times. You know, it was like a 9-hour intense day talking about things that, you know, I felt they were talking hieroglyphics and reciprocals, and I just didn't understand. You know, I understood some of it, but I couldn't weigh in. But at the end of the day, I became friendly with the guys from RBC. They kept talking about Art Basel. I'm like, what is this Art Basel thing? I don't even know what it is. And I felt a little embarrassed because everyone else knew, and there were a lot of people in the art world that were there, or collectors. So the RBC guy said, we're going to Art Basel at the end of the year. You know, this was maybe in the late spring or summer. So I said, hey, I want to come. And they said, okay, great. We'd love to have you down there. You just got to make your way down there. So before Art Basel, you know, I reconnected with the RBC guys, and I stayed in touch with them throughout, you know, developed a relationship with one of the financial advisors over there. And I'd invited him to the Friars Club, and he loved it and he geeked out. And I was looking for ways to help him as well. It's not a one-way street. It's give and take, give and take. It wasn't, hey, just get me to Art Basel. It was like, how can I help your business or clients? You know, and he appreciated that because most people don't ask that, you know. So I went down to Art Basel, and I went to the first night. They threw this event at the Versace Mansion in Miami, and it was just incredible. It was spectacular. I mean, it got so busy, they were turning away billionaires at the door. That's how crazy it was. And from that point on, I'm like, I need to be there. Not just I need to be there, I need to go down there with these guys. Because the guys that are coming with them are ball players or ex-ball players, clients that have, FU money, and really deep pockets. Hedge funds, venture capitalists, people with billion-dollar funds. And maybe they're not the right person to fund it, but they know someone that potentially can. So I made it a point to go to Art Basel every year, except for the year of the pandemic, because it didn't happen. And I've developed, like a investor-like list and people that are interested. And the reality of it is that because I've been to so many of these events, I used to have a database with all the investors listed, and this is a hard lesson learned. One of my interns had shared it through his personal email, and I sort of loaded it to transferred it to my Google account, but I think his account deleted, and then I lost the whole spreadsheet. So I've told myself one of these days I'm going to build the investor spreadsheet again, but I just haven't had a chance to go through it. But the reality of it is that I have like a Rolodex of investors, and I've forgotten their mandates because they all have different things. Like, come to me if a project needs finishing money, or come to me when the project is earlier on, or come to me if it's like a huge star, or come to me if it's like $1 million movie or a $20 million movie. So going to all these events along the way, I've built like a Rolodex of people I can go to, and the reality of it, like I said, same thing with actors. You hire them, ask them about their friends. You get one investor, you get their friends. And I've done that multiple times when I do a project, like, do you have friends? And their friends come in and put money in, So that's how I found private equity, just going to maybe like a dentist convention. That used to be the way that people always said is finding investors, go to dentists and doctors, One of my dear friends, that's what he does. All of his investors are dentists and doctors. He goes to these doctor convention centers and he meets them. So I haven't quite done that. I will if I have to, but I've gone to other convention centers. I was at this big thing actually here in LA. It was like a cell phone convention, and it was the last day I was there. And I met this guy. He was a guy from the Middle East that was between Miami and the UAE. And I told him what I did, and he was like, wow, that's interesting. I've always wanted to get into the movie business and monetize my money. So then he approached me about investing. I'd gone down to Miami a couple of times to meet with him and his brother. And I had built this model. I'm not exercising it right now, but it's basically last in, first out, and LIFO, last in, first out. That's the term. And he was really interested in this model, and how it works is, if it's available, if the film is set up, if it's not pari passu, this investor could come in last. When the film gets sold, they get paid out first. Like if the film is almost finished with production or is finished with production, and he really liked that model. That's what he wanted to do. And the problem is that I did find some films that did have that, but he wanted a quick return. So I couldn't guarantee a quick return. And I just told him that when I have a project where the return can be quick, then I can bridge you in and bring you in. But yeah, it was just right place, right time, sharing that story with this individual. But now when I build out projects, I'm also thinking about, what production company or what, maybe distributor, I could maybe partner up with, finance it and release it. That's been, my strategy now going forward. And I'm not going to do that on every movie. But I was just in the UK, for example, and I met with this writer-director, and he just did this movie that did really well. He's on a series now. And I met with two financiers while I was out in the UK that I met at Cannes. Well, one of them I met at Cannes. The other one I met virtually, but they go to Cannes all the time. And the first group I met with, they'd already known me. They liked my work. We want to find something together. They were familiar with the director I was going to meet with, and they want to work with him too. The second group I met with, they have 3 companies. One is a sales company that helps find financing. The other one finances against debt, meaning tax credits or any type of debt. And the third one is more of an equity, company. So I'd mentioned this filmmaker. They were very familiar with them, and they want to work with me too. So going into that meeting, I already liked the director, like his work. Well, I don't know if I like him yet. I know I like what I've read so far. So when I met with him, we spent 2 or 3 hours and really bonded together. And I told him about the groups I met with and that they know him. And he's like, I know them too. And that's great. So now potentially we have financing, the finance, whatever we want to do together. And then he told me about the 2 groups that financed his last film. And he told me about an overall deal that he has. He told me to speak with his agent to clarify it. His agent had introduced us. So ultimately, we don't have a project yet, but I like him. He's Cuban American from Miami. I'm Haitian American, I lived in Miami for a little bit. We have that connection. We like each other, like each other's work. He watched my film the same day, and he's like, I love what you did. I don't know how you created it. I want to work with you. And I liked his work. So now we ultimately are going to find something to work on together. We figured out the financing, and we just have to figure out the distribution that works properly, with this. So that's one, example of me figuring out the financing before we even shoot,
Can I ask you something real quick? Sorry.
Yeah.
What does it mean to respect the hustle? You said with some of these individuals, these high net worth individuals, you'll meet them and they respect the hustle. What does that mean?
Most people overpromise, underdeliver, So I'll give you a perfect example of where it completely flipped. I went to Sonoma Film Festival. I want to say it was maybe 2017. First time I had the film that I did with Mercedes Rule there. And how Sonoma works is that if you have a feature, at least back then, I don't know how it is now, if you have a feature, they put you up in a hotel. If you have a short, then they pair you up with a housemate or something, like a family that wants to go to the festival, and this is their way of volunteering. And the homes in Sonoma are very nice. So I paired up with this family that was really amazing, and they stayed in touch with me, and I stayed in touch with them after. And what ended up happening is that the woman of the household had sent me a text one day about this guy named Gary Nelson. And I opened up this link, read about him, and he has an HR company that's been very successful. And he wanted to get involved in film. He wanted to finance movies. And he wanted to make the kind of films that I was making. And he had some other things that he wanted to add. And he really loved Sonoma and his, like his town and his city and humankind. So she didn't tell me to contact him. She was just sharing. Found it interesting. I took it as like, I need to call this guy. So I found his HR number, called, asked to speak to him, asked who I am. I said, I'm a filmmaker. I read this article. I want to work with Gary Nelson. Oh, okay. All right. Well, you're not going to get his number. I'll give you his email. You can email him. And if he wants to engage, he'll engage with you. So right after, I wrote a very detailed email sharing about my experience in Sonoma. I love Sonoma. And that I read about his mandate and how I'm making the type of films that he wants to finance, and that I'd love to work with him, And he emailed me back within 5 minutes, sent me his number. We jumped on a call, and I told him, I'm going to come out there one day and meet with you and shake your hand, so I'm serious and I want to work with you. And he said, okay, all right, great. He probably hears it all the time. So what had happened was that I think I told you after Sundance, I go to LA for about a month. And that's what happened the following year. I went to LA, and the Bay is only a 45-minute plane ride, from LA, from LAX. So I booked a one-way up there. I called Gary. I said, Gary, guess what? I'm coming to Sonoma to meet you. And he was like, what? I'm like, yeah. So I took a Sprinter bus, and this stupid Mark Twain quote I kept hearing, because this was... Was it in the summer? No, it wasn't in the summer. That happened another time when I went to see Gary. But Mark Twain has this thing where he says, the coldest winter I ever had was a summer in San Francisco. And I'd gone in a t-shirt and I was like freezing cold. I didn't know that it was cold in San Francisco that time of the year. So anyway, I jumped on a Sprinter bus. It takes about an hour to get into Sonoma County. I got into Sonoma County, and then I jumped in a 45-minute Uber and drove to Gary. Met him. How'd you get here? You have no car. Oh, I took Uber. And then he told me, by the way, I'm an investor in Lyft. If you don't mind, take Lyft. So now usually I take Lyft if I'm in the US. If I'm outside of the country, Lyft doesn't exist. I take an Uber. And then I basically did exactly what I told Gary I was going to do. You know, like he saw that I took a plane, I took a bus, took an Uber just to sit down with him. I didn't ask for anything. And he bought me breakfast. It was very nice of him. And we had a really good meeting. We spent like almost 2 hours together. And it went from me pitching him to him telling me about the projects that he's wanting to make and do I want to be a part of it. And there was a project that he wanted to tell, and I got on it right away. It was about a prolific singer from the 70s or 80s. And I was saying, like, Gary, we need to move on it quick. Gary doesn't move as fast as I do, but what ended up happening was that there was an announcement in the trades that the story was snatched up, and it didn't happen. So because of that. But so meeting the hustle is, you know, I mean, I'm not saying that this is the only way to do it. I mean, this is probably, you know, I feel like I over delivered and under promised. That's what I did, you know, in terms of that, you know, like granted, I said that's what I would do, but most people aren't going to do that, you know, like if it's someone that's serious, NFO, next flight out. I will go anywhere in the world. Abu Dhabi, Dubai, you know, if I have to learn a couple of words, you know, whatever I need to do, I will go there. You know, it has to be someone very serious and multiple conversations. I'm not going to just go because it's a big investment in time and money, but I want people to treat me very serious and know that I'm no joke. And I expect them to cut a check. If I'm going to do all of that, if it fits within what they would, you know, their mandate or whatever, how they invest, I'll make sure that I tee it up to make sure that everything is in top T shape. And that's what I mean, like meet the hustle, because most people aren't going to do that. You know, it's exceptional or rare. So they know that I am going to take care of their asset. You know, I'm not going to take their money and run around the world and just live my life. I'm going to take their money and do my best to get them a return, at least break even, and communicate with them and let them know. And if I mess up, let them know too, you know, because there's no guarantees in this business. There's acts of nature that can affect things.
What would make a doctor, dentist, lawyer, someone who's a CPA invest in an independent film?
A lot of times it's vanity, you know, like, oh, cool, my name is on this project, you know, like I'm an executive producer, you know. Most of the time when they're doing that, there's this rumor, you know, and it's kind of true, is that even though these guys are brilliant, they're not good with their money. They put their money into stupid things. So a lot of times, at least a doctor, you know, a lawyer would be a little bit smarter. But doctors and dentists specifically, they do it all the time. They buy things that they don't need, you know. So that's why they're a great, you know, target in terms of that. And why they've invested so many times. Lawyers, more or less, maybe they'll bring in a client or maybe they'll put in, but same kind of deal. Like I remember being at Sundance and I went to this party, and I don't think anything happens by accident, but I ended up at this party, didn't know much about it. And the party or event, most of the people there were all investors, had no idea. I just went. And the young lady I spoke with majority of the time, she was a lawyer that invests in film, and she represents 50 people that invest. So, you know, again, they have links to it, or, you know, a lot of times maybe they want to help change the world, or they want to do some type of impact.
Yeah. Right. Or it's just exciting to go to a screening, go to a festival. Maybe their work is so, you know, cut and dry, or something that's not as I know it seems sexy and fun to be part of film. It's a lot
And
of hard
sometimes
work.
what they'll do is that they'll bring their client to set. Oh, you know, like, look, I invest in movies. This is what I do. It's, you know, it's vanity. Like, oh, wow, you know. So sometimes it's that, you know. So it's a multiple bit of things.